We're going to call the Budget and Finance Committee to order. We have a quorum. Mr. Peretz, Mr. Rosendahl, Mr. Englander, and myself, Bernard Parks, as the chair. Mr. Weezars is out today. Colleagues, if we can go through the agenda on consent items, I'd like to, let's see, we have it released. If we can go 4, 6, 7, and 8, which are liens, and just to remind everyone on the liens, unless there is, if there's a comment or concern about the substance of the issues, we have to do that. Was it 4 or 5? 4. I'm sorry. Then let's go back. Let's go 5, 6, 7, and 8. We hold 4 on the table. That we basically 4 is asked to be continued. They're in negotiation. We'll ask that consent on 5, 6, 7, 8, and we have 2 cards on 5. So before we make an action on 5, we'll have your comments. But on liens, we do not get into the details of the lien unless it's in closed session. And so at this time, we could move 6, 7, and 8 on consent, and also item 2. We'll take that back. Mr. McQuiston, you have a card on 2? Yes. Or public comment? Both. Or both of them, okay. Let's hold 2 then. Okay, if we can go 6, 7, and 8, 6, 7, and 8 on consent. Any issues on those?
No, I don't see any.
Okay. All right, one thing I'd ask on, and then we'll get to public comment on number 5, and number 4 will be continued because of a negotiation. Let me just ask on the committee report on that the clerk get with Office of Finance and add a couple of items into the committee report. One that would be important that we describe what efforts have been made to date to resolve these unpaid debts, so that it's in the narrative of the report. Also, is there a timeline as to addressing these liens to settlement? And also, did finance anticipate these particular revenues for the 11-12 budget? And if so, what would be the impact on the general fund? If we can ask to have those items added to the committee report. Sure. So we move those 3 items on consent. We can start off now. Let me do with public comment. Mr. McQuiston.
Jim McQuiston. I wanted to welcome Mr. Englander to the committee. I don't know how long you'll be on it, but at any rate, I did want to say that I was very appreciative of Mr. Smith for several reasons, but one of them is coming to a head right now, and that is the solid waste recovery program. We have to be moving on that. The last Water and Power meeting, they seem to be focusing on solar energy rather than converting waste. And the problem is that they want a 15-year payback right now, and that's with all of the subsidies, and it's going to drop. The subsidies are going to drop. 15-year payback is just way, way too long in the city because we have too much rubber dust in the air. Those solar cells are going to get filthy, and we're going to lose energy on those. But the solid waste, if you look at that waste pile out there on the 10 freeway, it's almost full. And when it's full, there's a lawsuit now up in Central Valley. Maybe they're going to close that hazardous waste facility up there. We are going to be in deep, deep trouble if we cannot get this solid waste recovery going. And Mr. Smith really worked hard on that. I really appreciated that. But we have to realize that he didn't do that all by himself. It was his staff that did it too. And I hope that Mr. Englander can really keep that afloat and moving ahead. And I think it's up to Budget and Finance Committee to really press on that, because it's going to be worse than our retirement funds if we lose that solid waste recovery. There's a lot of problems involved, one of which is the planning department, and we have to get that going.
Okay, and you also have a card in for number 2, if you can go.
Number 2?
Yeah.
Yeah, you want me? Okay. Jim McQuiston again on number 2. One of the difficulties with our system was, and I can still remember it, when Mayor Shaw was the mayor, he got the city attorney, who was appointed by the mayor and the council, to really do some dirty work. And Mayor Bowron, when he was judge at the time, the Good Government Commission, decided that the city attorney should never be a part of the city government. It should be special, and it should be elected by the people. And because of the tenets of the American Bar Association, that means that the city attorney is really responsible to the people who elected him, not to the city government. And if we put that back into the city government the way it used to be, we're just inviting corruption. And I think it's very important to keep that separate. And that's one of the things that I'm harping on. So I did want to put that in on 2. The CLA is supposed to be looking at that, and I'm sure that he will look at that with that idea in mind.
Thank you very much. I think this is a request for a report back.
Yes.
So that should become, anybody else have any comments or concerns?
I'm just curious from the CLA, what's your time frame of getting a report back on that item 2? Which is the city attorney elected or appointed? Do you have a sense of the outreach you're doing and any sense of a timetable on that motion of Ms. Perry's?
I don't have a sense of the timing, but we can see what's been done so far and what the time frame. We can provide a time frame for you,
Do
but
you have that by the time it comes to council?
the time frame,
Yeah.
we can certainly check on it. Yes.
Will that also include the counties as well, or at least LA County, because it says here other cities in California?
To look at those, yes. We'd respond to what's been requested in the motion.
Well, the motion only says cities.
Okay, if that can be added, if you'd like.
Well, yeah, that'd be great.
So we'll move that with, as amended, with adding counties, and also, by the time it comes to council, have a time frame as to the report back. So, colleagues, if we can move item 2.
So moved.
Then also, let me call item 5. We have 2 cards. Is it Alkane? Alicante, and,
Ron Alicante and Irvine Lockwood.
okay, what about Mark?
Yes.
Okay, why don't you both come up? And just, you certainly have the ability to make comments, but just so you're aware, because of the appeal process and such, we have no ability to respond to that, and whatever information that you're giving us, we hope you've shared with Office of Finance.
Understand that. So my purpose was that because we had requested a Board of Review hearing and it was ignored, I felt that this hearing may not be timely scheduled. So if we can continue this hearing to a later time till we get this issue of the prior kind of due process hearing resolved with it.
What I would suggest, if you have that in mind, is you get with Office of Finance, upon them advising us that they're going through that review, they will let us know, just as we did with number 4. We continue it based on their direction.
I appreciate it.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. So if you get with this item, colleagues, we move item 5, and we will, before it gets to council, if you can meet with Office of Finance, and if there is a change of their recommendation, we certainly can have it at that time.
Thank you.
All right? Thank you. Okay.
Okay, that should take us to item 1.
If we can move item 5 now. Okay, we move that. All right,
Yeah.
now we'll go to item 1. And then we're beyond 115, so we can go to the special agenda and also include item 9.
Which item would you like to hit first?
No, first, with 1.
Do 1?
But now
Okay.
we're available to
Yes.
deal with 9.
Okay, so item 1 is the city attorney report and ordinance. in response to motion Honolulu bonds relative to amending the Los Angeles Administrative Code to deposit all Watts Towers admission proceeds into the Cultural Affairs Trust Fund for programming, staffing, maintenance, and restoration of the Watts Towers. Arts, Parks, Health, and Aging approved the ordinance back on June 28th.
Okay, do we have someone from Cultural Affairs?
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Dov Lassell. I'm an assistant city attorney. The ordinance was drafted by Basha Jankowski. She's out of the office this week, and so I'm filling in for her, and with me is Saul
Romo for the Department of Cultural Affairs.
And then let me ask, before we get to questions of Cultural Affairs, the CAO had some concerns about the ordinance and requested some additions. Is that
Claudia Aguilar, City Administrative Officer. The original motion called for for our office to put forward the recommendations so that the controller can execute the motion. So what we provided to you were the actual instructions, the technical instructions on how to deposit that money into that fund.
okay? Is that included in the ordinance, or do we need to
No, it's
amend the
separate.
ordinance?
It's actually, we can include it as part of the committee report. I provided a copy of the instructions, so they could either be read in or just refer to.
So it does not have to be part of the
No.
ordinance?
That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay, all right, very good. So you have those? All right, those correct. All right, let me ask the department just a few questions. On addressing this issue of, it's roughly about, what, $12,000 or $14,000?
It's a little higher. Its average is about $16,000 a year.
What other funds are available to manage that particular site?
Well, the tower, this is specifically to the tower structures themselves. We have an art center that is adjacent to the towers, and we provide programming as part of our annual budget in the expense accounts toward the art center that does programs in conjunction with the towers. We have a contract right now with the LA County Museum of Art that's doing an assessment of our preservation and our restoration practices, as well as doing some modest day-to-day restoration and practices. What we'd like to do with the fees, if we're recovering from the tours, is to include it into the docent program and promote the towers as a cultural and tourist attraction. We just recently were awarded an award from the National Endowment for the Arts, $250,000 to look at the feasibility of remodeling a train station at the Watts Towers, and part of that plan integrates the Watts Towers as a cultural tourist spot. So aside from the fees that we have with LACMA, with some of our grant monies, we do have some programming dollars in our budget.
But let me ask you, how much are we putting into this cultural site? And you mentioned a couple of sites, but what's the dollar?
Well, right now, out of our budget that's going actually into the tower structures, we are not providing any money other than the agreement with LACMA, which is about $150,000.
So that's out of your budget?
That's out of our budget, correct. We
And then you
have,
say others is grants and other sources?
other sources would be grant monies and private foundation monies that come in to help support the towers and any of the ancillary programs that go with the towers restoration.
Do you have an idea what those dollars are?
Well, right now, we probably have somewhere between at the minimum, $250,000. For instance, LACMA did get, and the reason I'm hesitant to give you more accurate figures, LACMA has been doing some fundraising on our behalf. They recently received a grant from the Irvine Foundation. Some of that money will go into program dollars into the center for program activities, and some of it will actually go into the towers for its restoration. I don't know what the breakdown is on that grant. I have to meet with LACMA.
Would it be accurate that we say that roughly $400,000, is that a year, goes into the site?
Probably this fiscal year. I don't think that we'll be able to continue that, sustain that kind of activity annually for the next 3 to 5 years, but right now I think that's a comfortable number.
Okay. Then let me ask you also on how do we address these fees for other cultural sites? Do we relegate them just for that site, or are they general fund dollars, or?
They're going to go
what's the big
specifically
difference
to
with the
that site.
Hmm?
They're going to go specifically to that site.
So other cultural locations take the fees that are paid and it stays locally?
Well, the only other cultural site that we manage is Hollyhock House, and there was an interest at some point by Council District 13 to do the same thing with Hollyhock House as we are doing here with the Watts Towers and have the tour monies reinvested back into that particular facility. With respect to the other cultural facilities within the city, we don't manage any of the other cultural facilities, so I wouldn't be able to speak to those.
Okay. And then tell me again what you plan to use the funds specifically for?
We would like to, we would like to direct some of the money to the docent program to make certain that we have some training and provide some educational upgrades, sort of speaking, toward the training program for the docents, for the people who actually do the tours. We'd like to do some more marketing and outreach to promote the towers as a cultural destination, as a tourist destination. We would also like to start integrating the towers to some of the surrounding projects that may be occurring with some of our sister agencies.
Just a question. You just stated that there's one other facility in CD 13, a
Well, there's
Hollyhock
one-
House that actually gets the gate fee or that keeps it for the facility currently, or they're only interested now in looking at that?
They're only interested in looking at it. We manage two cultural monuments, one being the Watts Towers and one being the Hollyhock House at Barnesville Art Park. Both, currently, the receipts that we receive from both facilities go back into the general fund. We had talked about this during the budget hearings, the possibility of taking the tour fees that come from Hollyhock House and redirecting them back to the department to enhance the tourist and the docent program at the house. Those are the only two cultural facilities that we manage that I'm aware of where we're collecting fees. There may be others that the Department of Recreation and Parks manages, such as the Bannings Museum and, down in San Pedro, but I don't know how they manage their monies there.
Are the docents volunteers?
And they are volunteers. In some instances, we would like to pay them when we can, because for the most part, they're volunteers. In some instances, they're paid because when we get into a summer crunch and we have tour buses arrive, it's easier to have people on standby when, there's a prospect of a monetary compensation as opposed to just volunteering.
Bill?
No, I have no comment on Janice Hahn's motion.
Okay. All right. With the amendments that's proposed by the CAO that's been given to the clerk, we'll move this item, and then do we have, with the ordinance that's attached.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, takes us to item 3, which is a motion on Cardenas relative to instructing the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power and Fire Department to report on the status of potential cost recovery for fire services currently provided to the Department of Water and Power in related matters.
Okay. We have one card, Mr. McCosker.
Yeah, just now. I just left her a message on her cell phone.
I missed by an hour, by the way, going on that call. I worked at the firehouse yesterday.
Oh, my God. We're just mentioning that Janice Hahn's mother passed away
This morning.
this
Anyway,
morning.
good morning, or good afternoon, I should say. I just, wanted to come in and voice support for Janice's motion on this. Obviously, and I appreciate very much what the council has done on our budget. You amended the mayor's proposal, closing 18 fire companies and 4 ambulances permanently. You all amended that during the budget discussions and said, as money comes available, the fire department is a top priority, and you created an account, actually, to put money that comes available into to start restoring services. I think this is an opportunity. I think, obviously, we don't want the citizens of Los Angeles, the people who rely on the DWP, to be paying a penny more than what it costs to provide that service. But I think that this is part of the cost of providing the service. We go out on a daily basis on wires down, on leaking natural gas, on sheared hydrants. You actually did start billing the DWP appropriately for the hydrant testing that we do every year. And I think those things that we're doing are part of providing that service. And I think they're a normal cost. And this is an opportunity to actually bill for those things, to put the money then back into the fire department so we can start providing something closer to the service that we did before this budget crisis began. I think it would enhance public safety in LA, and it would certainly enhance firefighter safety as well. And I urge you to do it. Thank you.
Yeah, I do have a couple of questions.
Do we have the fire department up? CAO.
Good afternoon, Emil Mack, Operations Fire Department.
Ann Santillan, Interim Chief Financial Officer, Department of Water and Power.
And I'm Mark Davis with CAO.
Great, thank you. Yeah, who currently, right now, I'm looking for the nexus in this, and I know there are a lot of things that probably aren't paid, I'm guessing. So, as an example, the hydrants, the water in the hydrants, currently, who's paying for the water that comes out of the hydrants?
The water in the hydrants is not billed, it's not metered water.
But somebody's paying for it.
Well, then it would be the citizens as a whole as part of consumption overall. There is a certain percentage of loss of water, and that would be part of fire hydrant use.
So the DWP just absorbs that cost?
And passes that water cost. If it's purchased water, it would be passed on to all citizens.
Okay. So there's no reimbursement to them on that. That's what I was just trying to figure that out. And then also things like, and I'm sure there's a lot of other examples, the super scooper, things like that. I mean, other firefighting water sources. Do we collect on any of those? Does the fire department
When we're refilling firefighting aircraft, those are taken either off the hydrant system or open bodies of water. So that would fall under the same premise as DWP just mentioned.
Okay, I forgive me. I recall there was something previously in the harbor. They were trying to do something similar to this that wasn't actually passed by this body for reimbursement costs to DWP as well. And as a policy item in discussion, the council ended up turning it down, from what I recall. I'm just trying to get my arms around this and figure out if this is the direction, not from a budgetary perspective, because I think that we'd heard just now from Mr. McCosker, I think we all agree that firefighting protection services, police, public safety is the #1 priority of the city of LA. They're just trying to figure out, in fact, how those things get reimbursed from other departments, because ultimately, particularly with the Department of Water and Power, those costs that are passed on to the ratepayers. And so I want to make sure that if in fact that's the case, if we're looking at new revenue streams, that those are equal across the board, where we're not either passing those on to the ratepayers and or there's been a nexus, or we've already established those reimbursable costs. And I don't know if we've done that, but I don't know if anybody else has any questions on that.
I have some questions on this motion. I'm not too sure exactly where it's going with itself, but while negotiations are currently going on with bargaining units to identify potential savings, the city should discover new funding streams to permanently restore fire service. That's our bottom line. And the motion says, I therefore move that the Department of Water and Power be instructed to report on the status of potential cost recovery for fire services currently provided to LADWP. Okay, what are they? What are we talking about? How much services is LADWP and you involved in?
What it's speaking to, and we'll use a previous example that we have successfully worked with DWP, and that is hydrant testing. Hydrant testing was something that the fire department did on an annual basis. We physically went out and tested all hydrants to assure operation and report back any repairs necessary.
Yeah.
2 years ago, in the 09-10 fiscal year, we reached an agreement with DWP to reimburse the department for the time spent testing city hydrants. So now what we are looking at are potential other services that the fire department currently does, which would be in the examples of sheared off fire hydrants, transformers, wires down, things that the fire department currently does, which it can show hours and time spent that would be potentially seek reimbursement from the Department of Water and Power.
Yeah, that's very exciting. How long will it take you to figure that all out? And do you have any ballpark or low ball or high ball of what kind of monies we might be looking at?
We don't have any figures at this time, but between the CAO and our administrative staff and DWP, we could probably work out something in the not too far future. We have had some initial talks with DWP, and because of our previous collaboration with the hydrant testing, we feel that we can probably work towards some type of solution in this scenario also.
That's very exciting. You DWP?
We don't have any estimates yet, but we do reimburse the fire department about $1.5 million for fire hydrant testing they do annually. And when a fire hydrant or something is damaged because a customer hits it, we normally bill the customer or the person who damaged the property for the cost of replacing it. So if this was to go through, then I would assume we would also bill them for the fire department's time in making sure the area was safe because of the damage they caused.
And are your records clear enough that can help us come up with the reconciliation on the overall idea of potentially getting more money from DWP?
As far as the hours the fire department works, and I'd have to rely on the CAO and the fire department for that, but we do have a damage claim section in our city attorney's office who would help us bill the person who damaged city property and get that reimbursement.
That's very good. I'm very excited about this motion. But I have you here, Chief, so I have to take advantage of another moment.
Sure.
When we went through the whole budget process and restructuring of the department, one of my big issues, of course, is, and I don't agree with what the chief did with the Palisades. It isn't to do with privileged folks in the Palisades. It has to do with getting there from other locations. And with the 405 and the situation, Sunset, and also the PCH with the sewer project, and Santa Monica with the incline, I truly worry about getting an engine company in a timely manner to deal with a structure fire in the Palisades. And I don't like the risk the chief put us in, and I don't appreciate what he did. When you heard me make a motion or discussion about Santa Monica assisting us in looking at their incline, or Caltrans or any other state agency that's spending $1 billion on this one extra lane on the 405 and Carmageddon coming up this weekend business, is there any discussions about revenue streams by your department with any of these agencies, and is there anything I should be doing to assist you in that? The second question is, I've been on the phone dialing for dollars for the foundation, because I really believe that I want to restore it, and we've raised some of the money. I've raised some money by making some phone calls. I'm going to continue to do it. Do you have any thoughts in your mind about how I can deal with the Palisades issue, considering it is a location, isolated community?
To answer your first question, us, along with all the other participating agencies that are dealing with the 405 closure, are putting in reimbursement claims.
Good.
And so that will be monies coming back to us for
So all the staging
resources.
you're doing and all of the setup you're doing and all of that business, we will get reimbursed for that.
That's correct. And as you were saying,
From Caltrans? The state?
I don't know the agency, but we are putting in the reimbursement, and I can only assume it's a state agency, i.e. Caltrans. But that's just my assumption. Resources are being deployed, as you well know, because our concern is your concern. Our resources are going to be able to get to the residents in a timely manner to effect emergency services. So as you have heard on the news and as you have heard in your briefings, between Los Angeles Police Department, Fire, CHP, and all the associated agencies, great lengths are being prepared so that we do have response capability during this very difficult time, as we all know. And obviously the public message that has gone out is greatly enhancing the awareness of the public, and so hopefully their motoring during that period in that area will be lessened, and our issues of access and public safety will be not severely impacted.
Yeah, I'd certainly like, I'm sure Mr. Parks would say this too, a report back after this weekend, what kind of resources we put out, what kind of dollars we spent, and what agency you're dealing with to get those kinds of reimbursements.
Yeah, yes, we will.
Yeah, I think my questions would have been the same in comments as Mr. Rosendahl. I think our top priority from my point of view in terms of the budget needs to be restoring as much of fire services as we can. I'm just wondering if we have a sense yet, even a ballpark of whether this is hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. Can we actually hope that this could be a substantial number to help close that gap?
It would really be a guess at this point, but let's just use an example. Hydrant testing is bringing in $1.5 million. So we would probably say it'll, be somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe a few $1 million, but that's really speculation at this point.
Well, it certainly would be significant. That could completely refund a station or two or three, depending on the deployment. So that's exciting news if it proves to be the case. So, thank you.
Just a couple of follow-ups. And thanks for your patience. I'm still new at this. This is, in fact, my very first Budget and Finance Committee meeting, so...
You owe ice cream.
In looking at, in parity, and looking at, what's fair across the board and trying to figure out best practices and what they're doing, either in other municipalities, what the county does, perhaps even the gas company. If I'm assuming the fire department responds to major gas incidents, gas leaks and such, on an emergency basis, when the gas company is then called out to shut off or fix a valve or something that might be leaking, do we bill the gas company?
Not at this time.
Okay, and then, but what about perhaps like the county or others? Do they bill the private utilities? Do they pay for response?
We would have to research that, find out what LA County does.
Those are just the things that I'd like to know, because in looking at this again, it goes back to the rate pay. Somebody's ultimately paying for it, and so it's not DWP paying for it. The Department of Water and Power is owned by, it's a municipal utility. It's owned by the ratepayers. They pay the bill, and those bills have been going up dramatically. And at the same time, on the flip end, we've been reducing fire services across the board. So I get what's behind it, and it's important. But I just want to make sure we're doing it fair and equitably, and not going after the ratepayers to basically just try to find more money, which I think there's ways to go about doing it. I want to make sure we're following best practices and doing what we in treating the DWP with the way we treat other utilities as well. So if we could find out some of that information, I think it would be really helpful in making the decision.
Okay, thank you. Let me ask the CAO. I just want to verify, is in the first paragraph of the motion, is that an accurate statement that 1/4 of the fire trucks and ambulances are out of service?
No.
I know we have removed about 300 firefighters over, 3 years?
It's more like probably in the neighborhood of a tenth.
A tenth?
Yeah.
Okay, so I would hope that we could correct that, because I think that starts us off on the wrong foot if we're talking about 1/4 of the services. Let me just ask that we add the CAO into this review and report back. And a couple of things I think will be important for us is that, and I'd hope that we not lose sight of the deployment plan is saving us in the neighborhood of about $50-some-odd million. And when we talk about restoring services, then I think we have to be very, very cognizant of the impact on, particularly if DWP is being asked, what it may impact their rates, also their transfer. If I understand the transfer, it's based on their net profit.
The transfer is 8% of the gross operating revenues of the power system for the prior fiscal year. So to the extent these billings were power system, and it wasn't just a reimbursement, it may generate revenue and a city transfer.
Okay. So I think we need to make sure that the CAO give us that insight as to the impact on the transfer, also a potential impact on the rates, and also how it may impact previously identified budget savings with the new deployment, and so that we're fully aware of those issues. Also, what Mr. Englander talked about earlier, if we can make sure that there's an evaluation about billing best practices, whether and how we bill utilities, private, and the Southern California gas. And then we want to make sure we find out, if we could get that by the time it comes to council, what the source of that potential reimbursement is, so that we're aware if that's, it's probably not FEMA, but if it's a source that we could be aware, and we're assured that that money is coming. One item I'd also like the CAO to look into, this is something that came recently at the National League of Cities, where cities that have private or I guess public utilities, that they have found, in a sense, and it's looking at a strategy of charging their public utility for the usage of their paved streets, and whether that's a viable charge as it relates to usage of city streets. And so if we can ask all those things in the report back, and do we have an idea when we can possibly get that back?
Well, we need to set up to meet with them, for like 45 days.
And if that's something that's altered, could you let us know at the time it comes to council?
Okay.
Okay? So with those amendments and requests, we'll move that item.
You mean after recess, right? Because we're now...
Right, the end of August.
Yes.
But this will come to council before recess.
Okay, so the 45 days, we're playing tight.
But if he has, if that slips, let us know when it comes to council.
Okay.
So you got all of that? Okay. Next item.
I think that is the last item on our regular agenda. I think now we will go to the special. And the special is basically the CAO report relative to budgetary adjustments resulting from various employee bargaining agreements.
Good afternoon, Elizabeth Lee of the CAO's office. Before you is the CAO report back with technical changes necessary to implement the various bargaining agreements reached after the budget was adopted, and includes various recommendations to provide appropriations to partially offset departmental shortfalls. For the civilians employee side, as shown in Table 1, budgetary adjustments by bargaining unit, by reducing or eliminating furloughs from 26 days or more to 13 days or less for most employees, funding of approximately $73.6 million has to be restored to departments to be replaced with a combination of one-time and ongoing structural savings per MOU agreements, as outlined in Attachment 1. This includes salary adjustments, payment of 4% towards retiree health care beginning July 1st for most members of bargaining units, and civilian flex savings. The net budget impact of civilian MOUs is estimated to be zero after other savings agreed upon are realized. These include non-payment of cash overtime and excess sick time, freeze of regularly scheduled salary step increases, etc. To offset the $73.6 million to restore furlough funding to departments, the CAO has identified $10.7 million in salary adjustments, $41.7 million in the city's LACER's contribution due to the 4% employee retiree health contribution and salary adjustments, and $8 million in civilian flex savings. The CAO recommends that a total of $49.7 million be appropriated to the departments at this time. It is anticipated the balance of $13.3 million will be absorbed by departments through other previously mentioned MOU provisions, including transferring general fund employees to special funds if necessary. The CAO will continue to monitor department shortfalls through the FSR. Attachment 1 details the recommended prorated budgetary adjustments for department salary accounts. An additional $11.7 million is recommended reduction from the LACER's contribution for other potential MOUs to remain in the UB to be transferred as needed. It's important to note that as salary adjustment savings are to be used to offset the overall budget gap, it is important that identified savings should not be used to hire additional staff, as additional costs will be incurred and the budget gap will deteriorate. As for police SORN, it is anticipated that the police MOU and letter of agreement will also have a net budget impact of zero. This projection is based upon a pending council action scheduled for July 15th, which will freeze police SORN retiree health care benefits at current level. The police deficit consists of SORN salaries reduction of $41 million and a one-time cash payment of $14 million to police officers for equipment replacement. The offset will come from police SORN health savings of $2 million, non-payment of excess sick time of $4.5 million, and mostly from $44 million decreased contribution to pensions due to the freeze in retiree medical subsidy based on a 30% opt-in rate. We'll be happy to answer your questions.
Let me ask, first of all, Mr. Perez to come up from pension, because one of the things I want to make sure that we're all clear on the pension impact, and I was a little concerned when I read the report that we're doing actuarial studies after we've approved the MOU, and that's something that it appeared his letter has identified some issues that are inconsistent with the MOU, and maybe you can comment on that.
Thank you. Mike Perez, I'm the General Manager of the Fire and Police Pension System. I'm addressing your body now in my capacity as a fiduciary with the city. One of my fiduciary responsibilities with the system is to minimize employer contributions. The first and foremost is to provide benefits to our members, and the third one is to operate efficiently. But the second one is the one I'm here for today, and that is to minimize the employer contributions. In a public meeting before our board last Thursday, the actuary that the board hired, Paul Angelo of the Seal Company, who also happens to be the city actuary, he indicated in open session that the valuation that he performed for the city to cost out these benefits was done in March of 2011, and the assumptions that he used in March 2011 vary significantly from what the final deal is. And there's a couple of specific issues that he talks about. There's a variety of differences, but there's two in particular. One is he assumed that everybody who was in drop would be an active member, and as such, they'd be subject to the health subsidy freeze. The final deal does not recognize these members as being active. They're assumed to be retired and not subject to the freeze. There's about 1,200 of those people, and a couple of hundred have joined recently, with about 300 more that could join. Speaking of the drop members, that's another area that he identified that could be significant. It could represent some significant cost to the city. We've had a couple of hundred people join the drop program recently. Ordinarily, we have about 30 members a month join. This influx of people into the drop program, the actuary says, could eat up all the savings that the city is counting on from the health subsidy freeze. He made that statement out in the open, and so I think it's very important to consider that. A couple other points. One is you may want to have the actuary comment to the City Council this Friday when you're looking at finalizing this deal. The other is that I just wanted to point out, and maybe this is just a nuance, but the CAO report basically indicates that the city contribution is going to be decreased by the City Council. The Fire and Police Pension System, the board, it determines the city contribution, the annual required contribution. If that contribution is not made per the calculation done by the board, then there's consequences for the city potentially of having a higher interest rate to pay and having its bond ratings affected. Our board, what they plan to do is to do a new calculation based on the variety of changes that are happening with this MOU deal, then report on to the board later on what the impact would be. We expect to get $472 million on July 15th. If we get an amount less than that, the actuary is going to calculate what we should have gotten based on the point in time where we're going to get the remaining funds.
And I think your letter commented that if you don't get the 472, then does that put our savings in jeopardy of what we were expected to get the discount?
It could put those savings in jeopardy as well. That's correct. However, my understanding is the city is going to be making a payment of around $400 million next week. That represents the bulk of the contributions expected. So the amount in question would be the $72 million. So the fact is they're given the bulk of the money up front, so that impact would be lessened.
Okay, but the 72, there's still a timeline when that must be paid.
If I may, so based on the budget, the appropriation would, the contribution to the system would be $472 million. As we indicated in the report, that due to some anticipated savings, due to opt-in, trying to make adjustment for drop entrance, we would like to withhold some money $44 million and sort of keep it in advance. Now, we do have recommendation on what to do with that money, but we anticipate either Friday or early next week to give the system roughly about $428 million. And we will get the discount, on that. If for whatever reason later in the year there are additional monies that can be used, we can always go back up until June 30th to actually pay the system. Now, there is a cost to that, yes. We don't get the prepayment discount, but ultimately we have until June 30th to make a contribution. If I may, I would like to sort of step back because while the report does talk to some of the budgetary issues, it does speak to how, as a city, we've been able to move forward on some of our goals as far as labor, trying to move and get employees to contribute some of their salaries to retiree health care. And through various actions of the last several months, and certainly with your help, we've been able to reach agreements with most, if not all, of the units. We do still have a couple that are pending, but we do think at some point in the near future we're going to get some resolution. And so this reflects some of that good work that we've been able to do. And looking at sort of the civilian side, we're trying to mitigate the furlough number that was put in the budget, roughly is a 97, 98 altogether. We are trying to move that money back into departments as much as we can. There still is a piece that's outstanding. Most of that has to do with EAA, and then there's a few other small bargaining units, but both of that being EAA. We are recommending to move some money from HRB, and I know personnel is here. They do have some concerns about the full $10 million, both in civilian flex and certainly on the police health side. But we are going to work with them throughout the year, monitor the savings, and hopefully by the end of the year we'll be whole there. The other piece that's part of this report is certainly the police. We do have the $41 million in PD. You take the 41, you add the 14 as part of the agreement, we have $55 million potential problem. We did reduce that number, that 55, based on an operational plan and also part of the deal, PPO deal itself. If you may recall, in their PD's operational plan, there's $3 million in sworn salaries that they thought they could absorb, plus another $1 million in sworn overtime, and then along with the deal, we had roughly about 4.5 in excess sick. So that takes it down to the 46 million or so. 44, thank you. So, in speaking with some of the issues that the Siegel has raised, yes, when the study was done back in March, it assumed basically all sworn fire and police employees, and that did include drop. That was a full $68 million. So that was the estimate, roughly a little over 6% of pay. We do realize that we need to come back and actually find out what's going to happen. Perez, Mike did mention about people entering in the drop. Also the cost, what that long-term cost is, who's going to actually opt in and sign up. There's much that we don't know. At this point, it's undetermined as far as actually what will be saved. But we feel right now it's a rough estimate. If we go with a 30-60 split, withhold roughly about the $44 million, and then we'll come back in roughly the 45 days or so, or actually after the opt-in period, with some actual results with some cost savings numbers.
Let me ask you, is your calculations anywhere close to what the actuarial list said, that we could eat up all of the savings by the inclusion of drop? Are you?
The actual, Paul Siegel did, Paul Angelo, sorry, with Siegel, did mention that there's potential. We have some concerns about all of that being eaten up. Certainly there is, I think, 1,200 or so members in drop already, plus another perhaps 200 or more will be signing up. We have asked, or we actually intend to basically get our own actuary to start verifying some of the numbers from Siegel. I know we've been using Siegel. They use them. We've been using them, and I think it's time for us to actually get someone on board to actually start verifying some of the numbers.
So someone other, because both of you use the same actuary?
We've been using the same
And so if you're gonna
actuary
get
for several
A
years.
third one, a second one?
It would be a second one, yes. We both have discussed, and we feel it's probably time for us to have a separate
And then
action.
where did those funds come from?
We will have to find money within our own accounts.
Because I'm a little concerned if the actuarial is anywhere close to his assumptions, and the bulk or the worst-case scenario, all of the savings could be eaten up by this movement of drop and people moving into drop. We've gone through an exercise that, at the end of the day, that didn't benefit us. The other thing I'll ask is that when we had the MOU at council, it was my impression that the savings was going to be attributed to the cost of the pay raises as opposed to filling the gap within the budget. Did I have a misinterpretation? 'Cause
I think for the current year now, that basically we had 80 million as part of the ongoing savings with the overtime. The remaining amount, we have a hole as far as the actual salary count in 10-12, and it was our understanding that basically because of the savings that we would achieve over in pension, we'd be able to reduce our payment, and that would then cover that hole in PD's budget.
Okay, but we're talking about the whole, the 40 million. But when we talked about the contract, if I understood it, that contract at the end of the third year is what, 55 million per year? Or is it 55 million collectively over the 3-year period? And then we were advised that because of the way it's staggered, that the subsequent cost is up to 80 million, and that would be annually.
There is, yes, ultimately some cost to the deal. The expectation as it is there would be some savings, ongoing savings with freezing the retiree health or getting folks to contribute part of
But
their.
if these savings are being used for the $40 million hole,
Yeah,
what
only
do we
for this
use
year.
for? Because I thought the whole purpose of the negotiation, as we were told over and over, that the negotiation was going to make as close as possible pay raises cost neutral. But if we're using it for the fill the hole, what's going to pay for the pay raises?
Well, the expectation was basically by freezing retiree health that would then make, in the current year, that would make the department whole. And then in the out years, the retiree health freeze would then cover whatever COLA was.
So second, third, fourth year would then cover the pay raise?
Yes, the second and third year.
Okay, and thank you. And you said that you were going to get your own actuarial study done. When do you anticipate that to be completed then?
We basically, we are going to establish the opt-in period. It's a 45-day period, and then after that, we would then bring an actuary on board, and at the same time, they would have Siegel get that information as well.
So another 45 days from now?
The opt-in period, once that gets established, there's a 45-day, and then after that, it would probably be roughly about 30 days, more or less, for the actuary to probably run the numbers.
Okay, and then have you? What's the actual estimate if every sworn opted in to drop, every eligible actually entered in the drop? I think you've based it on guessing that there was going to be maybe 30% or so.
I think there's roughly about a little over 1,200 that are in drop now. There was a potential. I think there's 170 who had signed up last week. I don't know how many had signed up this week, but there was another couple hundred potentially.
There's 400 potentially. So have you run the numbers on if all 400?
No, that will be part of actually when we go back and do the study is actually who actually has signed up, who have opted in. All of that information will need to be digested.
And then there will be a financial analysis based on that, another separate report.
Yes.
All right.
Yeah, just taking that one step further, do you have any sense in this 45-day opt-in period what kind of monies we're looking at, and will we have a hole that we'll then have to scurry about and deal with? I've heard that there might be. I just like to get a sense.
You know, we in the report, we basically assume the 30/70 that we would end up saving 44. million. But we obviously have to wait till we go through the numbers. If council still approves the second reading of the ordinance, I mean, that is a key piece that needs to occur. Likewise, folks have a few more days to actually opt in to drop, see what those numbers are. The actual opt-in of the current, I should say, those who are not drop eligible, that has to occur, see who actually sign up. It's kind of a mixed bag. We understand that some of the younger ones maybe are not interested, whether some of the older ones, folks are maybe more interested in opting in. So unfortunately, we just don't have enough information, and until we actually have those periods, we close that 45-day opt-in, we run the numbers, we won't have a really good sense of what the savings will
I
be.
appreciate that. And do you have any sense of what options will be for us at that point when we get all that data together? Have you thought of 2 or 3 other ways we deal with an issue like this if we have to close it?
If we get to the point where we feel that there's not, after running numbers, there are not enough savings, then it becomes a question for us. Do we find reductions elsewhere to make additional contribution to the system? If it goes the other way, that would be great. Don't quite see it that way, but it's something that once we get down that path, we'll have to determine. I know it's not going to be easy for us. We already know now that the state's going to take about $8 million from us. $8 million is not a whole lot, but yet it's another piece in this puzzle. And so as we move forward, we're going to have to be really diligent this year, working with departments to find savings. And that is, you may or may not, between now and Wednesday when this report gets to council, whether departments come in and say, look, I still have a remaining deficit. You need to make me whole. But unfortunately, there are some savings through overtime that hasn't been captured, and some of the other soft savings, with when it comes to step increases, things of that sort that haven't been factored in. But it's going to be another tight year.
Okay, I'm just curious, has the police department, similar to what we heard the fire department say, looking at some of the work they're going to do this weekend and cost reimbursement and stuff like that? Do we know if the police department has taken that same energy? Because I'd like to see the state pay us back and keep that part of our business going.
It'd be nice, actually, if the state did not take our $14 million in BLF.
That's what I'm saying. And they want to take our money at the same time
they want to give us back through, I think it's through supplemental, which pretty much goes to police. But we still end up with ultimately some sort of a hole that we have to deal with. Likewise, with the recommendation of the report, we'll have to sit down with PD and make sure that they implement their operational plan, and we deal with whatever shortfalls that they might have.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I have to admit, I've never 100% understood the drop program. I wonder if you could give me a 2-minute explanation of why exactly we do this, and whether we have to put everyone that wants to be in it, whether we have to put anyone that wants to be in it, or whether we can say no to this particular expense and maintain a balanced LAPD budget.
But DROP was implemented, I want to say about 2002. You're right, Mike. It was basically a retention tool that the city used. At that time, we were trying to retain officers and folks, and so it was a way that basically people can say, okay, instead of them retiring, we're going to keep them up to additional 5 years. Their contribution to the system is frozen, though then they have this amount that they can accrue, I think at 5% per year, if I recall right. So right now, that is governed by ordinance. There is a question that has been raised whether or not we can sort of suspend that ordinance, or there's some way to mitigate folks going into drop. We're still sort of at the exploratory stage of that and try to determine whether that's actually an option and whether it's a feasible option for us. We will be, over the next couple of months, actually doing another drop study. Once we sort of, things settle as far as this sort of the PPL deal and the opt-in period, we're going to go back and actually revisit drop and revisit the cost neutrality of drop. And based on the information we get back from that study, then we'll determine whether or not we modify the program or we eliminate it.
Would the fact that we now pay new officers less money be a factor in that?
Drop is more of an issue when you get to hit 25 years. It's sort of that long-term, like I said, retention issue.
I would say it might have an impact, but I think what would have a much greater impact is the large numbers of officers going to the drop program right now. That was unanticipated. So we're going to have these people in the drop program a lot longer, and that could affect the cost neutrality. That was a nuance of the negotiations that wasn't contemplated, I think.
And I don't know if the cost neutrality is part of the ordinance or whether we're able to say, hey, this isn't cost neutral anymore, we can't afford it.
Well, that's the reason why we actually have to do the study. I mean, the drop program is supposed to be cost neutral, and so it is time for us to actually revisit the program to make sure that it is cost neutral.
But what I'm not clear on is if someone opts in, we do the study, says we can't afford it, what happens to those people? Are they in for 5 years? Are we locked into them, or can we do something to?
I think it goes back to the ordinance. I mean, unless we change the ordinance and there's some sort of retroactivity, and I'm sorry, I'm not familiar enough with the ordinance to be able to say whether we can do that. I mean, it's been raised as an option to trying to sort of undo the period, because as I understand, basically you sign up and you have 7 days.
Yeah, there's a 7-day revocation period, but it's clear that once you sign up for drop in the administrative code that you're in the program, and at the end of 5 years, you've got to exit. The actuary that presented to our board last week made a recommendation that to get some savings, what you do is you make everybody who's eligible for drop, they would not have their health subsidy frozen at current levels. That would stop the tide of people going into the drop program, and which is increasing the costs. One of the things we could think about would be to, if the council were to adopt that or consider that, would be to open up the administrative code, consider opening it up and allowing those people that recently entered drop because of this whole freeze issue to exit and to act as if they were never there. That's something, though, I think we'd have to consult with the city attorney on.
Anything else we can do? Can we declare a moratorium on it and freeze entry of people into drop while we sort this out?
Something we can look at. I think we'd have to go back and actually certainly make some revisions to the ordinance right away.
If we're going to do that, we presumably have to do that pretty quickly to make it have any impact.
I think the administrative code is very clear that in order to modify the drop program, it's got to be studied first, and then the results of that study can then be modified.
So does that mean we couldn't put in a moratorium while we were studying it?
That would be the position I'd take, but I'd again defer to the city attorney on that.
I think they view it as a contract, that be difficult to retroactively change it. But you can always determine whether it's cost neutral. When you ask the city attorney if it's cost neutral, they always smile. They never answer you. See?
Well, what I'm not entirely clear on is this based on cost neutrality? So if it's substantially not cost neutral, does that impact whether we're locked into it?
Well, I think basically if we do a study and it is determined to not be cost neutral, then the answer is no. We have a choice of either modifying the program to make it cost neutral, or we could, with probably a little bit of difficulty, actually eliminate it altogether.
It's a program. I think there's some issues in the program, I think, when they do the study as to where a person's allowed to get into it. Right now, you can go at 25 years. The other issue is the 5% guaranteed return is another issue of whether it's cost neutral.
They can modify it, and instead of having a person 100% of their pension amount go into the drop account, make it like 90 or 95. That's another way to modify it.
But that's going forward.
Yes.
And I think those are the kind of things that hopefully the study will come back and say what are the options. We've said for years that allowing people to go at 25 plus giving them 90% at 33, you really don't have an idea which one is keeping them there.
Yeah.
And then particularly with a 5% guarantee on the your annual return is another issue that you can't determine whether that's cost neutral when none of the other funds are guaranteed 5%. And so, and it comes out of the pension. It's not a separate amount of money. So those are the features that we need to look at. You know, one of the things I was wondering, when we talked about the whole issue of when a person's actually retired, did we come to a conclusion on that before pension went out for their actuarial? Because it would appear if they're on an assumption different than what was in the negotiation, did we just fail to communicate where the city was moving forward and when they declared?
Well, just to clarify, the pension system did not do the valuation. That was done by the city in March.
I mean, that's what I'm asking.
Okay.
If during the MOU, when you made the determination of what a retirement date, was it when you entered drop, or was it upon really retiring? Did we discuss that with pensions so they could have plugged that into their actuarial?
Well, I think there was some, I think at the time that we did the study, there was a sort of expectation that when we gave the instruction, it was us that actually initiated the actuary with Siegel, that we were not clear enough as far as what was the expectation on of that. And like I mentioned earlier, so it included everybody, even those that were actually in drop.
Because see, what I'm concerned about as we move forward is that we not end up with a second ERIP where we all thought it was cost neutral, and then there's a 40 million here and a 20 million here, and then pretty soon it's not cost neutral. And so that's what I'm very concerned about this issue, and particularly in light that as we move forward, I noticed in the CAO's report you identified a number of instances that you have no intent of giving more money to a department if they are out of budget. The problem is, what is the alternative? Because we threaten them on that every year. And when they come out of budget, we have something called the final FSR. Mm-hmm. We clean up everything for them, and they start all over with a brand new budget. And so what's the difference in this report that's going to hold them accountable?
Certainly, what's going to help is we're starting.
Put them in their honor.
So yes, that will help. But this is July 11th, and so I think one of the things that's will be helpful is we are starting at the beginning of the fiscal year, knowing that we have these gaps in departments, and I don't necessarily want to characterize them as all of them having gaps, because there is some savings that hasn't been accounted for in our calculations. There is the whole cash overtime payments that are not supposed to be made, and so those are supposed to generate some savings. Likewise, there's this great mechanism called the Managed Hiring Committee that will be looking closely at all departments as we go throughout the year. So we certainly intend to work with departments, monitor them, look at both the revenues and expenditures as we progress, and make sure.
We can deal with managed hiring when people come to us, but what about in the last year or so where departments just don't implement their budget? What controls do we have to find out early if that's going on?
Well, I think the first thing is certainly as we do our first financial status report, we'll have a good sense of whether or not departments have not implemented the budget. I haven't been told or been aware of any such departments at this point, though it is still early,
Yes,
as you know.
That's right.
So.
Then let me ask you an issue. Explain to us again, if we have to make an additional payment, we're judging what we're going to cut the pensions short, and also on medical. So that's part of the trend. But we have to do something, by June?
June 30th of 2012, yes.
But we're also going to lose some of the
discount
by not paying everything up front. When will we know exactly what those figures might be and what the loss, because this whole thing is based on what we're paying interest on the Tran, but we're getting money back on the discount. And so we come out with what we think is about $11 million savings. So when do we know if that 11 is really 7 or 8 or?
I would say the opt-in period is going to be ending mid-September, and so maybe a evaluation is done mid-October, so by the end of October, the actuary should report to our board. We would work with you, Ray, and make sure that we have the actuary compute options, payment options. So by the end of October, we should have an amount to provide an option.
By that time, is that also the timing we have for the drop study, around that same time, October?
You know, we'll have to check with the actuary on how long it'll take him to do the drop study, but once we have all of the opt-in period, we'll start from there. I imagine what's going to happen is going to be a matter of different, the priorities for the actuary, because we'll have this one is the most critical. I know they just finished up an experience study for pensions. I guess October, November, they're going to be working on the next study. So they're going to be busy once again, but we would like to actually get things wrapped up for drop, I think, no later than at the end of the calendar year.
Okay. And then let me ask you also on, in dealing with the, let me find my question. In dealing with the opt-in, what was the rationale for, 45 days that we're allowing opt-in? Was there a rationale of why? Is that something legal or?
You know what, if Thomas, are you back there still? He might know. I don't recall the discussion on the 45 days.
That just adds to our liability.
Good afternoon, Thomas Simonovsky, CAO. My understanding is that the 45-day opt-in period was negotiated as part of the deal between the Protective League and the CAO. I don't know exactly what the rationale was for 45 days, but that was what was bargained at the table. And I believe it was to provide for adequate time for the members to be able to consider what was in front of them, because it is a decision that they have to make. It would be an irrevocable decision, and so it would provide them with ample time so they can go ahead and be informed, get all the information, and then decide whether they want to contribute towards retiree health care or accept a subsidy freeze.
Okay. Was any consideration during that discussion about what the impact could be on the overall savings and how much, or a cap on the number of people that could go in during that period? Because we knew the opt-in could cost us considerably, and then we now have the issue of an uncapped number, and also the date of what retirement is. So we're adding significant dollars to the liability pension. At the same time, we're trying to cut back.
Yeah. I'm sure there were discussions about, you know, the different numbers on opting in versus not opting in. But in terms of whether we would, you know, put caps on, are you referring to drop entrance?
Go in during that period. Was there any consideration of a cap of during that 45-day period? What would be capped, or any number of people could come in?
I'm sure there was probably discussions about it, but I don't know to what extent, you know, I mean, obviously we know what the outcome is with the agreement, but I'm not really sure, but, you know, at the table exactly what those discussions were.
Is there any safeguard in the agreement that would limit people from opting in and being there to save the 2% and then basically retiring shortly afterward?
To my knowledge, no. You'd be able to opt in, make a contribution, and then you can retire at some.
Max out at 5, but you can retire in a month.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay. Oh. Come on in, sir.
Councilman Parks? Am I done?
Oh, any other questions, Mr. Perez? Thank you very much. Thank you for the letter.
My name is David Luther from the Personnel Department, and with me is Alex Vasquez from the Personnel Department as well. And in the report, the CAO recommends taking $8 million from civilian flex and $2 million from the police health and welfare account. We did want to make sure the committee was apprised of two issues that we have with those recommendations. 8 million in civilian flex that is proposed to be taken This week, the Labor and Management will release a report to council that updates this year's budget on civilian flex. We're on a calendar year cycle, not a fiscal year cycle, so this information is new. It comes around June of the fiscal year, so it's after the budget's been adopted. But we have basically good news to report on the civilian flex benefits for the period January 2012 through June 2012. And what this report will say is basically that we have approximately $4.7 million in savings from the budget in the civilian flex accounts because the premiums came in lesser than what we had projected, and enrollment in the city continues to drop. So if we look at what the CAO is recommending, the $8 million minus the $4.7 million that we'll be discussing shortly, probably at this committee, that leaves a balance of $3.3 million. There is a way to pay for the $3.3 million. There is a surplus in the trust fund, and we'll be preparing a report to council from the GLMBC in September that discusses the surplus from prior fiscal years. I think the point we wanted to make to committee today was that the $3.3 million is not a certain issue. It does take approval of the GLMBC to expend those funds. I think our recommendation would be to basically back out the $3.3 million until we had followed the process of reporting to the GLMC, getting a GLMBC vote, and then apprising council with a report in September. If the council decides to go ahead and take the money, we'll just report it. I mean, the other option is we just continue to report it as a deficit in the first FSR until there's an action certain that would give us that $3.3 million.
But the actions of the committee is advisory, right?
That has not ultimately been determined. At one point, we went through the process of going to impasse. At one point, we also came to the council for approval on some of these decisions. But at the end of the day, when we followed that process, we did get labor concurrence on the management proposal, so we never actually took that issue to its finality. It would be somewhat the same of what we went through last year.
If these funds were not taken by the CAO's report, then what other usage would they be held for?
They can only be used for benefits. They can cover administrative costs of the program. They can cover actual expenses of the program. In some years, there might be discussion of enhancing benefits, but I don't think that there's anybody on the GLMBC that would concur that that's an approach that would be taken. The primary use, though, would be to put in the reserve in the trust fund to essentially fund unanticipated increases in flex benefits. So in any respect, the city would get the use of those funds. It's just a matter of determining really two issues. What's the use of the funds within those limited purposes, and then who essentially has the final approval, which we have not yet ascertained.
Let me ask the CAO, is the view in taking the funds that because of the reduction in cost and the issue of the less need for funds with paying out on medical and the use of employees' funds, that makes those funds available? Is that the logic?
Yes, that's part of the logic. We feel that basically there is some savings that is available and will shortly become available that we can use to put some of this back, the money back into departments. We're trying to take all tenets of all the deals, put them together in order to restore and then offset some of the furlough costs in departments and try to make departments as whole as possible.
So somewhere down the line, if that logic doesn't mesh with the running of the committee, we could be looking to replace that money or portion of it.
That is correct. As I mentioned, yes, we do need the Joint Labor Committee to sign off, though there's still the outstanding issue of whether or not it's advisory versus whether we as a city can just make those changes. But we would recommend still moving forward, and we plan on working with personnel, keep monitoring the costs, keep working with the committee, and make them, if we have to make them whole, then we'll make them whole.
And this is coming to council on Wednesday?
On Wednesday.
Will we have any additional information beyond what you've given us today by Wednesday, or is this going to play out over the next several weeks to months?
We have just completed the fiscal year for which we're saying that there's a surplus. So what we're using right now is an estimate. We are required by the ordinance to report to council within 90 days at the close of the fiscal year, which is why I had mentioned that we expect to resolve this one way or another probably in early September.
So with that, yes, this is the information we have today, and we'll go to council on Wednesday with this bit of information plus the report back from the actuary. We're looking September, October, if we need to come back and make any adjustments where we get further information.
The September, October is going to be a major timeline for not only understanding where our revenues are, but how all of these savings are going to play out and
Yes.
a variety of things.
That's correct.
Mr. Luther, thank you. As a former CAO, I appreciate your comment.
I do have one additional comment, Mr. Parks. On the sworn side, it's a smaller amount, it's the $2 million. And it's just to simply inform the committee that we plugged the numbers in this morning from the CAO report. The subsidy, freezing the subsidy did result in some savings, but the premiums still went up for the police program. And as of today, our numbers are roughly $500,000 in savings versus $2 million. We're not asking that the committee the CO report be changed on that issue. We can continue to watch that report on it, and that number does change. It fluctuates somewhat depending on enrollment and how fast police officers are hired. But we did want to also point that out today as well.
All right. So that's another one that will flush out by September, October.
Yes.
All right. Any other questions? Okay, we'll move this report with
Thank you.
comments that have been made, and we'll see you Wednesday. Any other?
It's going to be fun.
You know what? This is the last item.
This is the last item.
We have no other cards, and so we're adjourned.
Great.
Good to have you back. Was it fun down there? It was nice. I really enjoyed the last week's city. We had some very good, was this the board? We had some very good meetings.